Westport, Edinburgh, 1828. Two men sit drinking with a woman in a small lodging house room. They keep her glass full until she can no longer stand. Then one of them pins her down. The other presses a hand over her nose and mouth and holds it there until she stops breathing. It takes a few minutes. They are careful to leave no mark, no blow, no blood, no broken bone. In a few hours, her body will be carried across the city and sold to an anatomist, who will pay more because it is fresh, and ask nothing because there is no mark to explain. This is their case file. In 1828, Edinburgh was the leading centre of anatomical study in Europe. Its medical school drew students from across Britain and America. To learn the body, they had to take it apart. Robert Knox was the most sought-after anatomist in the city. His private classes drew around 400 students. He dissected twice a day, and his advertisements promised a fresh subject for every lecture. The law could not supply them. Scottish anatomy schools were permitted to dissect only a narrow class of the dead: executed criminals, suicides, and the unclaimed bodies of the poor. 5 years earlier, Parliament had cut the number of crimes punishable by death. The gallows, the school's main legal source of bodies, began to run dry. By the mid-1820s, anatomists spoke of a genuine crisis. More students than ever, and fewer bodies than the law allowed them to use. So the trade went underground. Men called resurrectionists, grave robbers who dug up the freshly buried and sold them to anatomists, worked the cemeteries at night. Families fought back. They bolted iron cages over the coffins, raised watchtowers among the headstones, and paid men to sit out the night beside their dead, until the cemeteries of Edinburgh had become small fortresses, built to keep the living out. The demand kept climbing. The legal supply kept falling. Somewhere in that gap, a question waited. Who would fill it? The answer began with an accident. In late 1827, an old army pensioner named Donald died in William Hare's lodging house in the Westport, owing £4 in rent he would now never pay. Hare wanted his money back. He turned to a fellow lodger, William Burke, an Irishman, who had come to Scotland to dig canals and stayed on to mend shoes. That night, the two men lifted the lid of the cheap coffin, took the body out, and packed the empty box with bark from a tanner's yard so that it would still weigh like a man. Then they carried Donald through the dark to Surgeon Square, to a school that would not ask where he had come from. Knox paid £7 and 10 shillings. As they left, one of his assistants remarked that the doctor would be glad of more. Burke and Hare had found a trade. The only difficulty was supply. Lodgers did not die to order. In early 1828, a tenant named Joseph lay ill with fever. Rather than wait for him to pass, they filled him with whiskey until he was senseless, and then one pinched his nose and mouth shut while the other lay across his chest until the breathing stopped. The method left no wound, no blood, no broken bone, nothing for a dissecting student to question. A body killed this way was indistinguishable from one that had died in its sleep, and its freshness only made it worth more. This was the engine of everything that followed. Burke and Hare were not robbing graves. They were manufacturing the one thing the anatomy schools would pay the most to hold. Over the next 10 months, they killed at least 16 people, 12 women, 3 men, and a boy. Most were chosen for a single reason. No one would come looking. On the 12th of February, they smothered a salt cellar named Abigail Simpson, the one death Burke could ever date exactly. And through the months that followed, the rooms of the Westport took in others, among them a woman named Mary Haldane, and then the daughter who came asking after her missing mother and never left. Not every victim was a stranger. Mary Patterson was young and known in the streets around the Canongate, and when her body reached Surgeon Square, it was so fresh that the students gathered to sketch her before the dissection began. Some of them recognized her face. Then they killed James Wilson. The city knew him as Daft Jamie, a young man with a limp and a child's open warmth, who slept in doorways, ran errands for coppers, and traded riddles with the children of the West Port. He had a mother, and when he disappeared, she walked the streets asking after him, and the streets began to answer with rumour. That was the danger in it. The trade had always fed on the unmissed. Now it was taking faces the whole city could name, and a name that is missed leaves a thread for someone to pull. By the autumn, the two men had turned on each other. Burke suspected Hare of selling bodies behind his back and keeping the money, and he moved his share of the killing to a lodging house of his own. The split did not hold. Before October was out, the two men were working the same room again, the quarrel set aside for one more body. The last of them was an Irish woman named Margaret Docherty. On the last night of October, Halloween, Burke met her in a shop, told her his own mother had been a Docherty, and brought her home as a long-lost kinswoman. By the next day she was dead, pushed under a heap of straw at the foot of a bed. Two other lodgers, James and Anne Gray, had been turned out of that room and warned to keep away from the bed. The warning did the one thing it was meant to prevent. It made them curious. That evening, Anne went to the straw to fetch her stockings and found a dead woman's arm. They went to the police. Burke and Hare carried the body to Knox's rooms before the officers came, but it was already too late. The corpse was traced out of the dissecting room and back along the short road to the West Port. 4 people were arrested, Burke, Hare, and the 2 women they lived with. But suffocation leaves nothing to prove, and the case against them was thin. So the Crown made an offer. If Hare would confess and testify against his friend, he could walk free. Hare took it. He laid out every murder in detail and set William Burke at the centre of them all. The case turned on a single technique and a single silence. The technique acquired a name, Burking, killing by smothering and chest compression in a way that leaves the body unmarked. It was not designed for cruelty, it was designed for the buyer. The word entered the language. To Burke still means to quietly smother something or to suppress it. An unmarked fresh corpse passed as a natural death and sold for the highest price. The dissection table's requirements had shaped the way 2 men chose to kill. The silence belonged to the man who paid. Over 10 months, Robert Knox bought 16 bodies that arrived too fresh, too often, and sometimes wearing faces his own students knew. The records show no sign that he ever asked where they came from. When the murders surfaced, one of the doctors who examined the evidence, Robert Christison, judged Knox deficient in principle and heart. But deficiency was not a crime. Knox had broken no law that existed, and the law was the deeper mechanism. The whole trade existed because the legal supply of bodies had collapsed while demand kept rising. Edinburgh's schools needed hundreds of cadavers a year. The gallows produced a handful. Every barrier the living raised around their dead only drove the price of a fresh body higher. Into that gap stepped the resurrectionists, and behind them, Burke and Hare, who followed the logic to its end. If a fresh body was worth £10, the surest way to obtain one was to make it. Knox paid between £7 and £10 a body. Across the entire spree, Burke and Hare earned roughly £130 for 16 lives. No one had set out to design this. It was the product of a shortage, a law that could not adapt, and a buyer who had learned not to ask. Burke and Hare did not break the system. They completed it. The trial opened on Christmas Eve, 1828, and ran without a break into Christmas morning. Helen MacDougall, Burke's partner, was found not proven, a Scottish verdict that is neither guilt nor acquittal, and walked free. William Burke was found guilty. The judge, Lord Boyle, ordered that he be hanged, then publicly dissected, and that his skeleton be kept, in order that posterity may keep in remembrance your atrocious crimes. On the 28th of January, 1829, Burke was hanged in the Lawn Market before a crowd estimated at 25,000. His body was then carried to the university and opened on a dissecting table, the same kind of table that had paid for his victims. Some 30,000 people filed past to view the body. Students cut away strips of his skin. One piece was tanned and bound into a pocketbook that survives in an Edinburgh museum today. William Hare was released and put on a coach out of the city. He vanished from the record and was never found. Robert Knox was never charged. A crowd burned him in effigy and broke into his house, but the law never touched him. In time, he left Edinburgh for London. In 1832, Parliament passed the Anatomy Act, opening unclaimed bodies from workhouses to the dissecting table. The shortage that had built the trade was over. Burke did not live to see it. The man who turned 16 people into anatomical subjects became one himself, and while the bodies he sold were buried in unmarked ground and forgotten, his own skeleton still stands upright in a glass case in Edinburgh, on display, exactly as the court ordered, for all time. One question for the comments. Was Robert Knox guilty of anything the law could name? The next case on this channel, a 17-year-old who built a working nuclear reactor in his mother's garden shed. This is the sealed ward